Welcome back to a special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. We're joined by two parasitology experts and two Boehringer Ingelheim Vet Medic Incorporated representatives to answer questions about parasite management programs. Let's get right back to it. Dr. Wade, when you work with a producer to help them through their parasite problems, where do you start?
The first place we try to start is to try to see if the products that they're using is actually working in that particular operation. And probably the best way to do that is through fecal egg count and to see what kind of parasite loads we have there. That's where a lot of confusion has come into our part of the industry, because there's been such a big commotion about, you need to be using this product and rotating to a different product the next time, and without having the proper science behind that through fecal egg counts, we really don't know where we're at. So you're shooting in the dark unless you got the science behind it.
Dr. Navarro, what would you add?
Well, the parasite control is very ranch dependent. Each ranch has its own management, and you really have to incorporate your parasite control within your total herd health program. And I think people need to realize that because of the resistance issues, we're going to have to get away from some of the traditional timing that we've had, because our products have been effective and the timing wasn't that critical, but now it's very critical. There's a concept called refugia that's very important, and basically what that is when you deworm an animal, you get rid of all the quote good worms. We've been trying for years to get rid of parasites and we've lost, and now we need to keep some of those good parasites because they actually dilute the gene pool of the resistant parasites, and it slows down the resistance. But that requires some thought and some planning at the individual ranch level to do, and so that's one of the things that we need to look at.
Well, and when you talk about an individual ranch level and the decisions we make, Dr. Woodruff, I would be interested with the resistance issue on the increase. What are some of the management practices we can put in place on a ranch-by-ranch basis to lessen that?
Well, the thing that's very important for producers to do is to work with their local practitioner, their local veterinarian, because what the practitioner can do is, like Dr. Wade mentioned, can do some fecal egg count evaluation to see if there is actually a problem present, do some coproculture of those fecal samples to speciate which species of parasite is causing most of the problem on that particular facility. And then with that information in hand, then the producer and his veterinarian can come up with a very sensible program and the proper timing, as Dr. Navarro has mentioned, the proper timing to accomplish the kind of control that they need for those particular species of parasites.
Dr. Yazwinski, is there another line of attack that we should be considering?
Well, there's a lot of lines of attack. You have to adjust your parasite control program somewhat due to region of the United States, the north versus the south of the United States, and whether you've got flukes in addition to just roundworms, or if you just got roundworms. You have to adjust your parasite control program according to whether you're a cow-calf operator, a backgrounder / stocker operator, or a feedlot. And those considerations go a long way to determine when you treat and what you treat with and how often you treat. In addition to all that, everybody should find out if the wormer they're using on their operation is working. I mean, you're paying good money for it, you should be getting your money's worth out of that particular compound. And the only way you can do that is to select at least 10 animals and treat them appropriately. Make sure you get a weight on them and you treat them according to the label description as to what that animal should be treated for. Get a fecal sample, and then 14 days later, those exact same animals, fecal sample them again and do another parasite egg count. And you'll see whether you're getting 95, 98% efficacy, was what you want. You want your egg counts to reduce by about 90% at least. If you're getting less than 90% reduction in your egg count, you're wasting money on that product you're using. You should find a product that you're using that is working on your operation and then using it strategically in relation to what kind of an operation you have. Now, generally, we recommend in Arkansas, cow-calf operations, you treat spring and fall all of your replacement animals, but the mama cows, you treat them pretty close to calving. That's when you get all your money back from the cost of that particular dewormer. Stalkers, you have to treat them when you get them because you don't want to inherit some other person's resistance, but you better be using a product that's effective. And then follow your animals, egg count-wise, to see if you need to go back retreatment. And here again, use a product that's effective. Feedlot, you want to use a product or a combination of products that gets every worm out of those animals, because at a feedlot, you're putting animals to an awful expensive 140, 150 days. You don't want a lot of that money being wasted on feeding worms also. If you got worms in your animals, regardless of what kind of operation you got, you are losing money.
Yeah. Well, I want to follow that up, and Dr. Wade, I'd like your perspective specifically on timetable. What kind of timetable should we be following to reduce our risk of resistance, and does that vary from region to region?
I think it really does, and I think we put ourselves under a lot of pressure with the timetable issue. In my area, most people will worm spring and fall. I mean, twice a year is usually what you'll see those guys try to do. But most of that is based on the time that they have to try to fit the deworming schedule in, and usually that goes along with processing, or are they out of the fields from getting crops in, and it's really the wrong time for parasite control. But for them, economically, it's the best time for them to try to do it labor-wise.
Mm-hmm. What about the Gulf Coast region, Dr. Navarro?
Basically the same thing. Parasites are such a huge issue for us in the Gulf Coast that I actually recommend that we look at the parasite control first and try to time it correctly, and then work in our other vaccinations, palpations around the deworming, because in some, it's not in every herd, but in most herds, the timing of the parasite control is actually more critical than timing of vaccinations and other things. And if you don't control the parasites, then your vaccines aren't going to work, you're not going to get the production that you want. Again, you're feeding parasites and not the animals. And so that's one of the things that we look at on an individual herd basis.
And Dr. Woodruff, what about the timetable for the folks up here in the north?
Well, in the north, an ideal program would be spring and fall. The number one, or the best opportune time, would be in the spring, 4 to 6 weeks after spring turnout. Mm-hmm. What you do then is you've got a great opportunity to control the parasites that those animals have picked up while they've been out grazing that first 4 to 6 weeks. The second opportune time to do a parasite control program in cow-calf herds anyway is say late fall, early winter. That's when folks are generally handling the animals, and it's usually a pretty good time to control the parasites prior to the winter feeding in more concentrated feeding grounds.
Let me interject a little bit.
Go ahead, yeah.
A little cap issue here. This treatment of spring and fall, it's a good placement for treatment regimes, because worms, all worms that are in cattle, they need a good transmission in the spring and in the fall to buff up their numbers, so that the pasture stages are at a high enough concentration to get through the summer and then to get through the winter. So if you attack the worms then, when they need to be the most active, you're going a long way to controlling the worms. Plus, you don't want to treat cattle, if you can stay away from it, in the middle of the winter or the middle of the summer, because it's those two different times of year where there's the least amount of challenge, the least amount of new worms getting into the animal. Just envision that every time you treat an animal, you're killing all the susceptible worms, but you're leaving the resistant ones. Mm. And if these cattle only carry the resistant worms, then all the progeny they're going to have is more resistant worms. Yeah. But if you treat cattle in spring and fall, there's going to be new worms coming in that haven't been exposed, and that goes to Dr. Navarro's issue about refugia. You want the resistant worms to get diluted with the refugia worms, the worms that haven't been exposed to drug, and so that those copulate, and you don't get a preponderance of the worms that are resistant in the animal.
It makes a lot of sense. I never thought of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense, but it's taken years and years and years to go through various treatment regimes in the research and in practicality that haven't worked to get to a point where we start to see exactly what's going on drug-wise, worm-wise, and worm resistance-wise, tying it all together.
Very interesting. I want to follow up with you, Dr. Yazwinski, and you've mentioned several times today the fecal egg count, and we know that's a great way to learn what parasites are causing a problem in our operations. Specifically, what are some of the best practices we need to keep in mind as we do fecal egg counts to make certain that we're understanding the information that comes back?
Well, like I've already said, you isolate your animal, not isolate, you identify the animals that you treat with a compound that you want to take a look at, and you want to have at least 10 animals in each treatment group, and you weigh the animals to give them the exact amount of product that's required to treat that animal. And you take the fecal egg count then at day 0, and then you wait 14 days and take the fecal egg counts on those same animals. So you're looking at how well those drugs worked in those animals. And you do a treatment group or a couple of treatment groups of different products. You want to see how they're working on your operation, and a control group. 10 animals that you didn't treat. See how the worms by themselves are changing in that 14-day period. But you've got to identify the animals beforehand so that you fecal sample the animals at treatment and again post-treatment, because there's a huge fluctuation in worm counts and egg counts on an operation. You want to make sure you get the same egg counts looking at each other from 14 days separate. Now, the NOMS program with the National Animal Health Monitoring Service, they did a big program in the United States about 2-3 years ago. Dr. Gasbar and Dr. Bert Stromberg and Laura Ballweber, there were the 3 parasitologists across the United States. They got fecal samples from the whole United States looking at fecal egg count reductions, and they found an awful lot of resistance in the United States cattle, awful lot of resistance. But they didn't get very good definition between the different products. A 2-year program just got published from Europe where they did exactly the way I outlined it should be done. And they found that this Couperia, the small intestine worm that is the crux of the resistance issue, they found that in their operation, they did thousands of animals over there, hundreds of farms over there. They found that the most resistance was against ivermectin. Over 40% of the farms were not getting at least 90% egg count reduction. 40% of the people were not getting what they paid for in the drug. 30% of the doramectin, the Dectomax farms was not getting good egg count reduction. And 20% of the moxidectin, the cydectin animals. So there's resistance across all those dectins, but a stepwise difference between the different classes.
Dr. Wade, I wanted to ask you, so what is the economic impact of parasites to a beef cattle operation?
The biggest thing we see in our area is average daily gain. And it's amazing to me when you talk to nutritionists that have worked with some of these large cattle operations and they look at different feedstuffs that they're feeding, regardless of the cost of the feed. If they're not getting good average daily gain because they have a low parasite load there and they can actually respond to the feeding program, they're losing battle. It's a losing battle all the way around.